The first time he accused me of stealing, I almost laughed until I realized he was deadly serious. The second time, he leaned so close across the desk that I could feel the heat of his breath, and my pulse betrayed me in the worst possible way. The library was supposed to be my refuge, not my battlefield. Yet there I was, caught in a storm I hadn't expected, facing a man whose eyes burned with indignation as if I had broken into his home and taken his most sacred possession. Except the possession in question was nothing more than an old oak desk in the corner of the third-floor reading hall. I had chosen it because it was quiet, tucked away from the main aisles where students whispered too loudly, where researchers coughed or shuffled papers. That desk had become my sanctuary after a string of sleepless nights. I didn't think I was stealing anything, but apparently to him I had committed a crime. "You're in my spot," he said, his voice deep, firm, almost theatrical. "I've been renting this desk every evening for months. And you," he jabbed a finger toward me, his coat sleeve brushing against a stack of books, "you're sitting in it." I blinked at him, half amused, half annoyed. "I didn't see your name engraved anywhere. Last I checked, desks in a public library weren't for sale." He smirked, but there was no humor in it. "You don't get it. I pay for the quiet here. I book this table. It's mine at night. So pack up and move." I should have argued more. Should have told him that his arrogance wasn't my problem. But instead, for reasons I couldn't name, I stayed. I stayed and looked into his eyes, that unsettling mix of storm and fire, and my chest tightened in a way I didn't want to admit. That was the night the library doors locked by accident, trapping us both inside until morning. The silence that followed was unbearable. He paced, running a hand through his dark hair, while I sat at the desk pretending to read, though the words blurred into nonsense. "What's your name?" he demanded finally. I glanced up from the book. "Why? Planning to file a complaint. Something like that." "It's Alex," I muttered, then added with pointed defiance. "And I'm not leaving." "Of course you're not," he shot back, his lips curving into that infuriating half-smile. "Not until the staff unlocks the doors tomorrow." That was when it hit me we were really stuck. No one would come back until morning. I had food in my backpack, enough for myself but not for sharing. I wasn't about to play survival partner with some stranger who thought he owned a piece of the public library. Yet when the lights dimmed and the echoes of the city faded, the silence between us shifted. It wasn't just tension, Anna Marie, it was something heavier, softer, something that pressed against my ribs as I caught him watching me from across the desk. He introduced himself eventually, almost reluctantly, as Daniel, a writer. That much I had guessed from the notebooks stacked beside him, pages filled with slanted ink and half-crossed-out sentences. "A writer, huh?" I said, trying to sound casual. "What do you write?" "Things you wouldn't read," he answered. "Try me." His eyes flickered, as if weighing whether I deserved an answer. Finally, he said, "Stories about people who don't belong. People who fight for a place in the world." For a second, his words disarmed me. They echoed too close to home, though I didn't dare let him know. "Sounds like you're one of them," I said before I could stop myself. He stilled, his jaw tightening. "Maybe I am." That night stretched long, the ticking of the library clock loud in the cavernous room. We spoke in fragments, in guarded sentences that carried more weight than either of us wanted to admit. He told me about rejection letters piling up, about an editor who said his stories were too raw, too personal. I didn't tell him much about myself, only that I came here because my dorm was too loud, because sometimes silence was the only thing that kept me from falling apart. But there was one moment, just one, when the wall between us cracked. He was scribbling furiously in his notebook, the scratching of his pen echoing. I leaned over without thinking and asked, "What's that line?" He looked up sharply, as if I'd intruded into something sacred. But then, almost grudgingly, he read it aloud. "Some people only find their home in the quiet company of strangers." The words lodged in my chest. I didn't know why, but they did. By midnight, the air between us was electric. Every glance felt like a challenge, every silence a conversation. I caught myself wondering how someone could be both infuriating and magnetic at the same time. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with those piercing eyes. "Why are you really here, Alex? People don't sit in libraries this late unless they're running from something." My throat tightened. I could have lied, should have lied. But something about the way he asked, sharp yet vulnerable, made me want to answer. "I guess I'm just tired of feeling like I don't belong anywhere," I said softly. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, to my shock, he closed his notebook and slid it across the desk. "Read this. Maybe you'll understand." The pages were filled with characters who looked like shadows of myself, boys who loved boys, men who carried scars invisible to the world, people who fought and lost and kept going anyway. When I looked up, my chest ached. "You write about us," I whispered. His gaze softened for the first time. "Because no one else does." The night unfolded with confessions neither of us had planned. He spoke of loneliness, of fighting to carve a place for his voice in a world that tried to silence it. I admitted that I had hidden parts of myself for too long, afraid of what people would say. At some point, we moved from opposite sides of the desk to sitting side by side, shoulders brushing as the silence stretched. The lamp cast a warm halo around us, the rest of the library lost in shadows. When his hand brushed mine by accident, maybe Noti didn't pull away. The truth was terrifying. And yet, in that vast empty library, it felt like we were the only two people left in the world. By 2 in the morning, the air inside the library had shifted. It wasn't just heavy with silence, and the smell of old paper. It was charged, alive, as if every book around us was leaning closer to listen. I had never been this aware of another person in my life. Every movement Daniel made, from the way his hand brushed across a page to the way his jaw clenched when he was thinking, pulled my attention like a magnet. And yet, the stubborn part of me refused to admit it. "So," I said, pretending nonchalance, "is this your strategy? Trapping me in here so I'll admit the desk is yours?" He chuckled, low and rough. "Please, if I'd planned this, I would have brought better snacks." I almost smiled. Almost. But the thought of snacks reminded me of the granola bars and water bottle tucked in my bag. My conscience wavered. Should I share? He caught me hesitating, his sharp gaze narrowing. "You've got food, don't you?" I exhaled, resigned. "Fine. 1 bar. Don't get used to it." When I tossed it onto the desk, he caught it in one swift motion, smirk tugging at his lips. "Generous. I'll repay you with something better." "Like what?" "A story." And he did. He read aloud from his notebook, his voice low and steady, filling the echoing room. It was about a boy who lived in shadows, who carved poems into the margins of borrowed books because he had nowhere else to put his feelings. The boy met another boy who saw him, really saw him, and for the first time he wasn't invisible anymore. I listened, still as stone, afraid that if I moved the moment would shatter. His words sank into me, line by line, until my chest was too tight to hold them all. When he finished, he closed the notebook gently, as though afraid it might break. "What do you think?" he asked, his tone guarded, bracing for rejection. I swallowed. "I think it's the kind of story someone like me would cling to like oxygen." His eyes flickered with something fragile, something unspoken. For the first time since I'd met him, Daniel looked less like a storm and more like a man trying to hold himself together. We drifted closer without meaning to. Hours blurred. Sometimes he wrote while I read. Sometimes we traded whispered confessions that seemed to grow braver in the safety of that locked library. At one point, he asked, "Do you ever feel like you're just pretending to be who people want you to be?" "All the time," I admitted. His gaze lingered on me, searching, as if the truth I gave him wasn't enough. "And what would you be if you stopped pretending?" The question cut deeper than I expected. I didn't answer right away. My throat ached with words I wasn't ready to say. When I finally spoke, my voice was barely a whisper. Maybe I'd be someone who isn't so afraid of loving the wrong person. The silence that followed was heavy, trembling with meaning neither of us dared to name. By 4, exhaustion pulled at me. I stretched out across the desk, my head resting on my arms. Daniel sat nearby, scribbling, but every so often I felt his gaze brush over me. "You should sleep," he murmured. "And you?" "I'll write. Someone's got to keep the night alive." I must have dozed, because when I opened my eyes again, the faintest light of dawn was creeping through the high windows. Daniel was still there, slumped in his chair, asleep with his notebook open in his lap. I watched him in the quiet of the morning. His usual tension melted away. His face, softened in sleep, was almost unbearably beautiful. And in that fragile moment, I realized the truth that terrified me most. I wanted to know him. All of him. The library doors finally clicked open at 7. The staff bustled in, apologizing for the accidental lock-in. I packed my bag quickly, avoiding Daniel's eyes, unsure of what last night meant. As I turned to leave, his hand brushed mine, deliberate this time. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. My heart stumbled. "Are you asking or demanding?" He smirked, but his eyes betrayed him. They weren't challenging now, they were pleading. "I'm asking," he said softly. And though I knew I should walk away, though every warning in my head told me this was dangerous, I heard myself answer, "Yes." The nights that followed blurred into a ritual. I came back, and so did he. We didn't admit it was on purpose, but neither of us missed a night. Sometimes we argued about books, about whether silence was better than music, about who made the worst coffee. Sometimes we sat in quiet companionship, the space between us alive with unsaid things. And sometimes he read to me, words that weren't polished, weren't meant for anyone else, but that he trusted me with anyway. The more time I spent with him, the more I saw past the arrogance I'd first met. I saw the weight he carried, the loneliness that bled through his bravado. And maybe he saw mine too. One night, when the rain hammered against the windows and the world felt far away, he looked at me with eyes so raw it hurt. "Alex," he whispered, "what if I told you you're the first person I've let this close in years?" I swallowed hard. "Then I'd tell you I don't want to be the last." His breath caught, and in the hush of the library, the truth finally spilled between us, not in words, but in the way his hand found mine, warm and steady, like it belonged there. But of course, nothing stays perfect. It started with whispers. Other students noticed us lingering together. Someone mentioned seeing us leave the library at dawn, shoulders brushing too close. In a world where two men sitting across from each other was innocent, our closeness shouldn't have mattered. But in the world we lived in, it did. I overheard them one afternoon in the cafeteria. "That writer guy, Daniel? You know, he's a cruel laugh. Figures. Look who he hangs around with." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I tried to brush them off, but when I met Daniel that night, I saw the same anger simmering beneath his calm. "Let them talk," I said, trying to be brave, but he shook his head. "It's not that simple. They'll use it against me. Editors already think I'm a risk. If they hear he didn't finish." The wall between us, once crumbling, rose again. Days passed where he avoided my eyes, where his laughter disappeared. I told myself not to care, that I didn't owe him anything, but every night I found myself at that same desk, waiting. And every night, he showed up too torn between wanting me close and pushing me away. The tension became unbearable. Finally, one night I snapped. "Why do you keep coming back if you're just going to shut me out?" I demanded. His voice cracked like glass. "Because I can't stay away from you, Alex. And that terrifies me." The words sliced through me. I wanted to be angry, wanted to walk away. But instead, I stepped closer, my voice trembling. "Then don't. Stay. Just stay." His hands trembled as they closed around mine. His forehead pressed against mine, and for the first time the walls broke completely. The kiss was inevitable. It wasn't gentle, it was fierce, desperate. A release of all the tension we'd carried for weeks. Tasted like fear and hope all at once. When we pulled apart, breathless, his eyes burned into mine. "We can't undo this," he whispered. "Good," I whispered back, because for once I wasn't running. And yet, the world outside those library walls was waiting. The next morning, His name appeared on a campus forum, paired with rumors too cruel to repeat. His stories were mocked, his reputation dragged through whispers that had little to do with his writing and everything to do with who he was. When I confronted him that night, his face was pale, his notebook closed. "I told you this would happen," he said, voice hollow. "They'll ruin me." My chest ached. "Then let them. We'll prove them wrong." But he shook his head, retreating into himself. "You don't understand. You still have a life ahead of you. Don't tie yourself to someone who's already sinking." His words shattered me. For the first time since that locked night, I left the library alone. I didn't go back the next night, or the night after that. The desk sat empty. I knew it did, because I passed the library on my way to class and couldn't stop myself from glancing up at those tall windows, wondering if he was in there, waiting. But the thought of facing him after the way he'd pushed me away made my chest tighten until I couldn't breathe. It's funny how quickly something can become a habit. For weeks, Daniel had been my late-night ritual, my anchor in the silence. Without him, the nights stretched endless, each hour heavier than the last. I told myself I was better off without the drama, without the risks. But every time I lay awake staring at the ceiling, all I could think of was the way his voice had broken when he said he couldn't stay away from me. He hadn't meant to hurt me. That was the worst part. He'd been trying to protect me, to protect himself, but in doing so, he'd carved a wound neither of us could ignore. On the fifth night, I gave in. The library smelled the same as always, dust and old paper, a faint trace of lemon polish. The air felt heavier, though, as if it, too, remembered what had happened between us. And there he was, sitting at our desk. His head was bent low over a notebook, but he wasn't writing. The pen dangled from his fingers, unmoving. His hair was messier than usual, his eyes shadowed as if sleep had abandoned him. When he looked up and saw me, something flickered across his face: relief, pain, guilt. He stood too quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Alex." My name left his lips like a prayer. I wanted to be strong, wanted to demand answers, but my voice came out quieter than I intended. "Why did you say those things? That I should stay away? That you were sinking?" He rubbed a hand over his face, exhaling hard. "Because it's true. Because everything people are saying gets only going to get worse. I've spent years building something fragile, and now it's hanging by a thread. And if you're tied to me, they'll drag you down too. I don't care what they say." I shot back, my voice trembling. "You think I don't know what it's like to be called names? To feel like you're always too much or not enough? I've lived that my whole life. But for the first time, being with you made me feel like I wasn't alone. And now you want me to just walk away?" His expression crumbled, raw and unguarded. "God, Alex, you don't make this easy." Maybe it's not supposed to be easy. For a moment, silence stretched between us, thick with everything we hadn't said. Then, slowly, carefully, he closed the distance. We didn't touch, not yet. We just stood there, the old oak desk between us, the ghost of our first argument echoing in the air. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You make me want things I told myself I couldn't have. A home, partner, someone who sees me and doesn't look away. And you make me want to stop hiding," I admitted. "But I can't do this if you keep shutting me out every time it gets hard." His eyes locked on mine, desperate, pleading. "Then teach me. Stay. Even when I mess up. Even when I'm scared." The walls between us, so carefully built, cracked open again. This time, when he reached for me, I didn't hesitate. His arms wrapped around me, grounding me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. My forehead pressed against his chest, and for the first time in days, I could breathe. The weeks that followed weren't easy. The rumors didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder. People whispered in hallways, snickered when Daniel walked past. One of his professors hinted that his work was political in a way that wouldn't sell. I could see the strain wearing on him, the way his shoulders hunched tighter each day. But he kept showing up at the desk. And so did I. Sometimes we sat in silence, the weight of the world pressing down on us. Other times, we fought about how much we should hide, about whether love was worth the risk. But beneath every argument was the same truth neither of us could deny. We needed each other. One night, when the pressure felt unbearable, Daniel pushed his notebook toward me. "Read it," he said, his voice hoarse. I hesitated, but his eyes begged me. So I opened the pages. It was a story about a boy trapped in a library overnight. A boy who thought he was alone until he met someone who changed everything. The details weren't exact, but the heart of it was undeniable. It was us. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes as I read line after line. When I looked up, he was watching me, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. "Do you hate it?" he asked quietly. "Hate it?" My voice cracked. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever read." His breath shuddered out, relief flooding his features. And in that moment, I realized something. He wasn't just writing for himself anymore. He was writing for us, for people like us, for anyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. But not everyone saw it that way. When he submitted the story to a literary journal, the rejection came swiftly, wrapped in polite words that burned like acid. Too niche, too controversial, not the right fit for our readership. I watched him crumble. The rejection wasn't new, he'd had plenty before, but this one cut deeper, because it wasn't about his skill. It was about who he was. He slammed the letter onto the desk, his voice shaking with fury. "They don't even care about the words. All they see is that it's about two men. And that's enough for them to toss it aside." I reached for his hand, but he pulled away, pacing. "Why do I even try? Why do I keep setting myself up for this?" "Because the world needs your voice," I said firmly. "Because there's some kid out there right now who needs to hear that it's okay to be like us. And if you stop writing, he'll never get that." His eyes glistened, torn between hope and despair. "And what about you? Do you really want to tie yourself to someone who might never be accepted? Who might always be fighting uphill?" I stepped closer, my hand finding his again, refusing to let him pull away this time. "Yes, because you're worth it. Because we're worth it." For a long moment, he just stared at me, as if searching for any hint of doubt. But when he found none, his shoulders sagged, and he pulled me into his arms, holding on as though I was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. That night, we kissed again, slower this time, with the ache of two people who knew the world might break them but were choosing each other anyway. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't easy, but it was real. And as dawn crept through the library windows, painting us in soft gold, I realized that maybe love wasn't about escaping the world's judgment. Maybe it was about facing it together. The storm broke in the most public way possible. Daniel's story, our story, ended up published after all. Not in the polished journal that had rejected him, but on a small online platform that embraced voices like his. Within days, it went viral. Students whispered about it in hallways. Teachers referenced it in classrooms. And though names were changed, anyone who had seen us together knew. It didn't take long before people started pointing, laughing, sneering. "That's the writer," someone muttered one morning as we passed. "The one who wrote about the boy in the library." "And that's him," another said, eyes flicking to me. I wanted to pretend I didn't hear, but the words clung like burrs. Worse were the online comments, the ones that twisted something beautiful into something dirty. Daniel tried to shield me from them, but I saw the way his jaw clenched, the way his hands trembled when he closed his laptop. One night, I found him at our desk, staring at a blank page. His pen hovered, but he didn't move. "They're not wrong," he said quietly, without looking at me. "About what?" "That I'm reckless. That I dragged you into this. That maybe writing about us was selfish." My chest tightened. "Daniel," he shook his head, eyes finally meeting mine, raw with guilt. "What if I ruined your life? What if you'd have been better off never meeting me?" The anger in me sparked, not at him, but at the world that had convinced him he was poison. I slammed my hand onto the desk. "Don't you dare say that. You didn't ruin anything. You gave me something I didn't think I'd ever have. You made me feel seen. You made me feel like I mattered." His lips parted, but no sound came out. I stepped closer, pressing my forehead against his. "You are not selfish for telling the truth," I whispered, "and I am not sorry for loving you." The silence that followed was sharp, alive. Then his pen dropped, and his arms wrapped around me, fierce and desperate. The weeks ahead tested us harder than I could have imagined. There were nights Daniel almost gave up, convinced no one would ever take him seriously again. There were days I considered walking away, exhausted from the stares, the whispers, the quiet cruelty that hung in the air. But every time we broke, we found our way back to each other. It wasn't easy, but maybe that was the point. Love, I realized, wasn't about being untouched by the world. It was about choosing each other despite it. The turning point came in the unlikeliest way. The library hosted a community reading night, inviting local writers to share their work. Daniel didn't want to go. "They'll eat me alive," he muttered, pacing our dorm room. "They'll laugh me off the stage." Or, I countered, "They'll finally hear you." He hesitated, torn between fear and the faintest spark of hope. Finally, he whispered, "If I do this, will you be there?" I didn't even let him finish. "Always." The night of the reading, the library was packed. Rows of chairs filled the aisles I had once thought belonged only to me. The oak desk where we'd met sat in the corner, watching silently as if it remembered. Daniel's hands shook as he stepped up to the podium. For a moment, he just stood there, eyes darting across the crowd, breath uneven. Then his gaze found me, and he began. He read the story of two boys trapped in a library overnight, of accusations and stubbornness that turned into confessions, of silence that became companionship, of fear that gave way to love. He didn't name us, but he didn't need to. The truth pulsed through every word, undeniable and alive. By the time he finished, the room was hushed. Then, slowly, applause rose, hesitant at first, then swelling, filling the library until it was deafening. Daniel's eyes shone with tears. He bowed his head, overwhelmed, and I sitting in the back, heart aching with pride, stood. I stood for him, for us, and one by one others followed. It wasn't everyone. Not all the whispers stopped. But in that moment, surrounded by the thunder of hands clapping, I knew we had cracked something open. Later, when the crowd dispersed and the library fell quiet again, I found him at our desk. "They stood for you," I said softly. He shook his head, smiling faintly. "No, they stood for us." I slipped my hand into his. "So what now?" He looked at me for a long moment, eyes searching, then squeezed my hand. "Now we keep writing, living, loving, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." His lips brushed mine, gentle this time, full of promise rather than fear. And in that kiss I understood. The world might never be easy, but as long as we had each other, we would never be alone. Years later, when people asked Daniel about his first big break, he always told the story of a night when the library doors locked by accident. He'd smile, glance at me, and add, "Best accident of my life." And every time my heart answered the same way, mine too. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.